The biting cold of the December blizzard swirling outside Boston's Heinz Convention Center was nothing compared to the icy stares directed at the elderly woman and the small girl as they pushed through the revolving glass doors. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of expensive roasted coffee and fresh pine from the Christmas decorations, but for 11-year-old Jada Washington, the atmosphere felt suffocatingly thin. She tugged at the sleeves of her oversized gray hoodie, trying to disappear inside the fabric, her arms wrapped tight around a backpack that looked like it had survived a war. Beside her, Hattie Washington stood tall, her gray cleaning uniform pressed sharp enough to cut paper, a stark contrast to the sea of tailored wool coats and designer scarves surrounding them. They approached the security checkpoint, their worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble floor. A burly guard held up a hand before they could reach the metal detector, his eyes scanning Hattie's uniform with a dismissive flicker. "Deliveries and staff entrance are around the back, ma'am," he said, his voice flat, already looking past them to the well-dressed family behind. Hattie didn't flinch. She simply reached into her canvas tote bag, right next to her battered thermos, and pulled out a crisp, laminated badge. "We aren't delivering food, sir," she said, her voice calm and steady, possessing a dignity that made the guard blink. "My granddaughter is a finalist." Jada kept her head down as they walked through the scanner, feeling the weight of a dozen eyes burning into her back. The main hall was a cavernous space filled with 300 spectators and a semicircle of 10 workstations. The other 9 finalists were already setting up. They were the golden children of the tech world, teenagers with sleek haircuts, sipping energy drinks, unpacking brand-new MacBook Pros and custom mechanical keyboards that glowed with neon lights. Jada found Station 7 and carefully pulled out her machine. It was a 5-year-old Dell, thick as a brick, with black electrical tape holding the left hinge together. When she placed it on the pristine white desk, it looked like a relic from another century. A hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage, illuminating Professor Silas Thorne. He looked exactly like his magazine cover's impeccable suit, rimless glasses, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to the Iron Wall Cyber Cup," Thorne announced, his voice booming. "Today, you're not just playing a game. You are attempting to breach the most advanced security protocol ever designed for the Department of Defense. It is flawless. It is unbreakable." The audience erupted in polite applause. Jada didn't clap. Her eyes were locked on the massive demo screen behind Thorne, squinting at a stream of scrolling data. There, buried in the corner, a tiny line of red code blinked once, then vanished. "Gentlemen," Thorne continued, ignoring the only girl on the stage, "only the most sophisticated tools and the sharpest minds belong in this arena." As if on cue, Jada pressed the power button on her laptop. The machine roared to life with a sound like a dying lawnmower WR clap. The fan screamed, struggling to cool the aging processor. The noise cut through the sophisticated silence of the hall like a knife. A ripple of giggles spread through the front row. One of the other contestants, a boy with expensive headphones around his neck, smirked and whispered loud enough for Jada to hear, "Hey, don't toast the Pentagon with that thing." Professor Thorne stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly, peering over his glasses at Station 7, at the little girl shrinking behind her noisy, taped-up machine. The amusement in the room curdled into something colder. Thorne's lip curled just slightly, a look of amused pity that hurt worse than anger. "It seems," he said into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension, "that someone has wandered into the wrong playground. They say an ant cannot move an elephant, but they often forget that the elephant is most afraid of what it cannot see beneath its feet." By 10 o'clock that morning, the ceremonial atmosphere of the convention hall had evaporated, replaced by the thick, suffocating tension of combat. On the stage, the click-clack of expensive mechanical keyboards sounded like rapid gunfire. Jada's hands moved across her worn, shiny keys with a fluidity that betrayed the clunky appearance of her machine. From the shadows of the tech booth, Benny, the young sound technician, watched her feed on his monitor. He noticed what the judges didn't. While the other candidates hesitated or checked their notes, Jada didn't stop. Her fingers danced like a concert pianist playing a silent melody, her focus absolute. The competition moved to the theory and defense round. Professor Thorne stood center stage, arms crossed, looking like a king surveying his subjects. "Defend the integrity of the iron wall," he challenged. One by one, the candidates from Silicon Valley prep schools recited textbook praises of the encryption, using big words to say very little. When it was Jada's turn, she didn't launch into a speech. She simply tore a piece of notebook paper, wrote a single sentence with a cheap ballpoint pen, and held it up for the floor proctor. The proctor, looking confused and slightly annoyed, carried the folded note to the judge's table as if he were holding dirty laundry. Thorne took the paper between two manicured fingers. He read it once, his eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. Then, a sound echoed through the microphone, a deep, resonant chuckle that made Jada's grandmother stiffen in her seat. He leaned forward, broadcasting his amusement to the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne announced, his voice thick with mirth. "It seems our youngest participant, candidate number 7, believes she has found a flaw in the Department of Defense's architecture." He waved the scrap of paper in the air like a flag of surrender. "She claims the system suffers from a timing error." He stepped down from the dais, walking all the way to Jada's desk. The camera followed him, projecting his looming figure onto the giant screen above. The contrast was painful, the powerful man in the Italian suit towering over the small girl in the hoodie. "Tell me, child," he sneered, gesturing to her taped-up Dell. "Do you intend to teach me about processing speed with this museum piece? It can barely run a word processor, let alone analyze military-grade encryption." The room erupted. Parents, professors, and other students laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that filled the cavernous hall. It was the sound of authority dismissing the invisible. Jada did not shrink away this time. She looked up, meeting Thorne's gaze through his expensive lenses, and spoke into the silence as the laughter began to die down. "It is not a speed error, sir," she said, her voice quiet but crystal clear over the speakers. "It is an arrogance error. The truth is a bitter pill that powerful men refuse to swallow. Instead, they simply smash the glass." Thorne's smile had vanished the moment Jada spoke about his arrogance, replaced by a cold, calculating glare that followed her even after the session ended. He knew, with the instinct of a predator, that the girl wasn't guessing. She saw something he had missed, and that terrified him more than he would ever admit. At noon, just as the finalists were heading to the cafeteria, the PA system crackled to life, screeching with feedback before Thorne's voice boomed across the hall. "Attention, candidates. To ensure we are testing for true agility under pressure, the time limit for the final round has been adjusted." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "You will not have 3 hours. You will have 90 minutes. The announcement hit Jada like a physical blow. She froze, her small hands gripping the edge of her table until her knuckles turned white. 90 minutes. Her mind raced through the calculations. Her laptop, with its aging dual-core processor and limited memory, needed at least 2.5 hours to run the decryption algorithm she had planned. 90 minutes wasn't a challenge. It was a death sentence. Up on the VIP balcony, Thorne stood watching the chaos below, his eyes fixed on Station 7, a smug satisfaction returning to his face. He didn't need to disqualify her. He just needed to make the math impossible. Jada didn't go to the cafeteria where the other contestants were laughing and complaining over gourmet trays. Instead, she and Hattie found a secluded corner behind a row of potted ficus trees. Hattie sat on a folding chair, opening her worn canvas bag. She pulled out a Tupperware container and a battered silver thermos. "Eat," Hattie said softly, unwrapping a sandwich of bologna and cheese that had gone slightly flat. She poured steaming hot chocolate into the thermos cap. The rich, sweet smell of cocoa clashed with the sterile, metallic scent of the convention center, creating a tiny bubble of home in a hostile world. "I can't do it, Grandma," Jada whispered, staring at the floor. "The machine isn't fast enough. Even if my code is perfect, the hardware will choke." "He knows it." Hattie reached out, tilting Jada's chin up with a rough, warm hand. "Baby, look at me. That man up there, he changed the rules because he's scared. He saw a giant inside a little girl, and he's trembling." She pressed the warm cup into Jada's freezing hands. "God never gives a burden to a shoulder that can't carry it. Now drink. You need your strength." While Jada went to the restroom to wash the despair off her face, the main hall was nearly empty. Benny, the sound technician, was coiling cables near the stage. He had heard the announcement. He had seen the smug look on Thorne's face. And he looked at the sad, taped-up laptop sitting alone on Station 7. His heart hammered against his ribs. He thought about his own student loans, his job, the risk of getting fired. Then he thought about the way those professors had left. With a quick glance over his shoulder to ensure the cameras were pointed away, Benny moved. He didn't walk. He slid through the shadows to Jada's desk. His hands, usually steady, were shaking as he pulled a small screwdriver from his belt. Click. The back panel of the Dell popped open. It was dusty inside. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own prized possession, a high-performance 16 GB RAM stick he had been saving for his gaming rig. It was worth more than Jada's entire laptop. He ripped out the old 4 GB stick and slotted the new one in. Snap. It locked into place. Hey. You there. Benny froze. His blood ran cold. He slammed the back panel shut just as Professor Thorne rounded the corner, his shoes clicking sharply on the floor. Thorne's eyes narrowed, scanning Benny from head to toe. What are you doing with the candidate's equipment? Benny swallowed hard, his throat dry. He held up a roll of black electrical tape he had grabbed at the last second. Just securing the casing, sir, he stammered, pointing to the cracked hinge. Safety regulations. Exposed wires could be a liability. Thorne stared at him for a long, agonizing second. He looked at the tape, then at Benny's terrified face. Finally, he sneered. Make sure you don't touch anything else. We don't want to catch poverty from it. Thorne brushed past him, dusting off his suit jacket as if the air around them was dirty. Benny let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a lifetime. He quickly screwed the panel back on, gathered his tools, and vanished back into the shadows just as the contestants began to return. 1:30 p.m. The lights dimmed. The countdown clock appeared on the massive screen. 89:59. Jada sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys. The machine hummed a different hum this time, deeper, hungrier, but she was too focused to notice. She took a deep breath, unaware that the weapon in her hands had just been reloaded. The loudest sound in the world isn't a scream or an explosion. It is the silence of 300 people holding their breath at the exact same moment. By 2:30 p.m., the iron wall had lived up to its name. The battlefield was littered with casualties. Station 1, the boy with the mechanical keyboard, had thrown his headset down in frustration 10 minutes ago, his screen locked in a permanent red access denied loop. Station 4 was crying softly, her face buried in her hands. The intricate encryption algorithm designed by Professor Thorne was eating the most expensive hardware alive, freezing processors and crashing systems. Thorne walked among the carnage like a general surveying a conquered field, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He checked his watch. 15 minutes left. He stopped at Station 7. Jada was vibrating. Not from fear, but from a strange, electric synchronization with her machine. Something was different. When she had started the decryption script, a heavy, memory-intensive beast of a code that should have choked her old dual-core processor, instantly the laptop didn't freeze. It didn't stutter. Instead, it surged. The fan was spinning so fast it whined like a jet engine preparing for takeoff, but the cursor flew across the screen. Jada didn't know how or why, but she could feel the raw power humming beneath her fingertips. It was as if the old Dell had suddenly grown new muscles. She was executing a timing attack. It was a delicate, dangerous method. Instead of trying to break down the front door of the fortress, she was measuring the microscopic delays in how the server responded to incorrect passwords. It was like listening to the clicks of a safe. The rhythm told her the combination. But it required precision, speed, and nerves of steel. Thorne leaned in close, invading her personal space. The smell of expensive cologne and stale coffee wafted over her. He saw the sweat beading on her forehead and mistook focus for panic. "You're overheating, little girl," he whispered, his voice low enough that only she could hear, dripping with false sympathy. "Just like your machine. There is no shame in quitting now. Save yourself the public humiliation. Go back to your grandmother and tell her you did your best." Jada didn't blink. She didn't look up. Her world had narrowed down to the cascading lines of green text reflecting in her dark eyes. Request sent. Response time 0.045 milliseconds. Pattern detected. Key fragment found. Are you listening to me? Thorne's voice sharpened, irritated by her defiance. He reached out, his hand hovering near her screen as if to point out a failure. You are wasting everyone's. Done. The word exploded out of Jada's mouth, shocking even herself. It rang through the microphone, causing feedback to squeal through the hall. Thorne jerked back as if he'd been slapped. Jada spun in her chair, her eyes blazing, pointing a trembling finger at the massive projection screen suspended above the stage. Look, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. Look at the screen, Professor. Thorne let out a scoff, turning to the audience with a shake of his head. She is delirious. Disqualify her for. But the audience wasn't looking at him. 300 heads were tilted upward, mouths hanging open. Thorne turned around slowly, his annoyance shifting to confusion, and then, in a single heartbeat, to absolute horror. On the giant display, the grid for Station 7 was no longer gray. It wasn't red. It was a brilliant, pulsating neon green. The words "System Locked" dissolved, replaced by a rapid-fire stream of data. The iron wall was crumbling, brick by digital brick. Classified headers, encryption keys, and administrative protocols were spilling down the screen like a waterfall. And then huge bold letters stamped themselves across the center of the display, 10 feet tall. Access granted. Root privileges unlocked. Thorne's face drained of color, so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated from his body. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant smile that had plastered his face for 6 hours was wiped clean, replaced by the hollow, haunted look of a man watching his life's work turn to ash. For 10 long seconds, there was no sound in the Heinz Convention Center. No applause. No whispers. No movement. The silence was absolute, heavy, and crushing. The only thing that could be heard in the massive hall was the furious, high-pitched roar of a battered fan inside a 5-year-old laptop, roaring like a lion over the corpse of a giant. The silence was shattered not by applause, but by the violent screech of a microphone hitting the floor. Professor Thorne didn't just step forward, he lunged. His face, moments ago pale with shock, was now flushed with a dark, Venus crimson. He slammed his palms onto the judge's table, sending water glasses rattling. Fraud. The word ripped through the air like a gunshot. The spell in the room broke. Whispers erupted into shouted questions. Cameras flashed wildly. Thorne pointed a trembling finger at Jada, his eyes bulging. Cut the feed. Turn off that screen. This is a manipulation. A farce. He marched down the stairs, ignoring the other judges who looked bewildered. He stormed towards Station 7, his breathing ragged. You think we are fools? Thorne spat, looming over Jada. She shrank back into her chair, the triumph in her chest replaced instantly by the cold grip of fear. That piece of junk you call a computer. I saw the specs. It has a dual-core processor and 4 gigabytes of RAM. It is physically impossible for it to execute a timing attack of this magnitude in 90 minutes. Unless... He whirled around, scanning the shadows of the stage wings. His eyes locked onto a figure freezing in the darkness. You! Thorne roared, pointing at Benny. The technician. I saw you tampering with her machine during the break. All eyes turned to Benny. The young man looked like he might pass out. He stepped into the light, his hands raised in surrender, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't. Benny stammered, his voice cracking. He tampered with the hardware. Thorne announced to the room, seizing the narrative with the desperation of a drowning man. This girl didn't crack the code. She had outside help. She is a cheater, and this technician is her accomplice. He turned back to Jada with a sneer of victory. Disqualify her. Escort them both out. And call the police. Security guards began to move forward. Jada looked at Hattie in the audience. Her grandmother was standing up, shouting something, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Jada felt tears sting her eyes. After everything, the cold, the hunger, the work, it was going to end like this? Because she was poor? Because she needed help? Benny stepped forward, closing his eyes, ready to confess and take the fall to save the girl. It was me, he started to say. I put in a Stand down. The voice didn't come from the stage. It came from the front row of the VIP section. It was deep, calm, and carried the undeniable weight of absolute authority. A man in a gray suit stood up. He had been sitting quietly for 6 hours, unnoticed. He walked up the stairs to the stage, his movements precise and heavy. As he stepped into the light, the glint of a pin on his lapel caught the overhead lights, the eagle and shield of the Department of Defense. It was Colonel Marshall. "Colonel," Thorne stammered, his aggression evaporating into confusion. I am handling a breach of integrity. This girl cheated. Her hardware was altered." Colonel Marshall ignored him. He walked straight to Jada's laptop. He looked at the taped hinge. He looked at the spinning fan. Then, he looked at the screen at the thousands of lines of code Jada had written. He scrolled through them, reading with the speed of an expert. "Professor Thorne," Marshall said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "Did you write the algorithm that cracked your system?" "What?" "No, Did the technician write it?" Marshall asked, glancing at Benny. "Of course not, he's a cable puller." Thorne scoffed. "Then who wrote the code?" Marshall turned the laptop around so Thorne had to look at it. "This isn't a script downloaded from the internet. This is original, adaptive syntax. I'm looking at the timestamps. She wrote this code line by line in real time, right in front of us." Marshall turned to face the audience, placing a hand gently on Jada's shoulder. "The allegation is that her hardware was improved. Perhaps it was. Perhaps someone gave her a better engine." He paused, looking directly at Thorne. "But a Ferrari doesn't drive itself, Professor. You gave her 90 minutes to do the impossible. If she had a supercomputer, she still would have needed the genius to find the key. The RAM didn't break your system. Her mind did. But the rules." Thorne grasped at straws, his voice shrinking. "The rules," Marshall interrupted, his tone turning to ice, "were designed to find the best talent to protect this nation. And it seems we found her, despite your best efforts to sabotage the process." Marshall stepped closer to Thorne, lowering his voice, but the microphones picked it up anyway. "Your system, the Iron Wall, is currently protecting our naval communications. And an 11-year-old girl just walked right through it. We need to have a very serious conversation about your contract, Professor. And your resignation." Thorne staggered back as if physically struck. He looked at the audience. There was no support there. The laughter that had filled the room hours ago was gone. In its place was a sea of eyes looking at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands, effectively disappearing from the narrative of his own show. Jada looked up at the colonel, her eyes wide. Marshall smiled down at her, a genuine, warm smile. "Good work, soldier," he whispered. And then, the applause started. The sweetest victory is not watching your enemies fall. It is seeing the reflection of your own worth in the tear-filled eyes of the people who loved you when you were nothing. The chaos of the accusation had settled into a reverent ceremony. Dr. Elena Brooks, the head judge who had watched the entire spectacle with quiet intensity, stood at the podium. She held a heavy crystal trophy in one hand and a giant check in the other, a full scholarship to the MIT Youth Genius Program. "In this industry," Dr. Brooks said, her voice echoing warmly through the hall, "we often look for the fastest machines. But today, we were reminded that the most powerful processor in the world is the human heart." She looked down at Jada. "Come up here, Jada." Jada walked to the center of the stage. She felt light, as if gravity had decided to let her go. She accepted the trophy. It was heavier than she expected, cool and solid against her palms. When she stepped up to the microphone, she didn't look at the cameras or the important men in suits. She looked past the blinding stage lights, searching the shadows of the back row until she found the gray uniform. "I didn't do this to prove anyone wrong," Jada said, her voice small but steady, traveling to every corner of the silent room. "I did it to prove that my grandmother was right." She didn't wait for applause. She ran. Jada bolted down the stage stairs, clutching the trophy to her chest, bypassing the reporters and the outstretched hands of well-wishers. She ran straight to Hattie. The old woman dropped her canvas bag, falling to her knees right there on the expensive carpet, disregarding her bad joints. Jada collided with her, burying her face in the rough fabric of the cleaning uniform that smelled of bleach and lavender soap. Hattie rocked her back and forth, sobbing openly. "I knew it," Hattie whispered into Jada's hair, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you, baby. I told you you were a giant." Around them, the people who had sneered at Hattie's lunchbox and Jada's shoes earlier that morning were now standing, clapping, some even wiping away tears. The invisible walls of class and prejudice had been momentarily dissolved by the sheer force of brilliance and love. As the crowd began to disperse, Jada pulled away gently and looked toward the exit. Benny was there, packing up his tool belt, trying to slip away unnoticed. Jada walked over to him, Hattie close behind. Benny looked up, startled, a nervous smile touching his lips. I might get fired for this," Benny admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "If they fire you," Colonel Marshall's voice boomed as he approached them, extending a business card to Benny. "You call me. The Pentagon needs people who know when to follow the rules and when to break them for the right reasons." The colonel then turned to Hattie, taking her calloused hand in both of his. "Mrs. Washington, you have raised a patriot. When she is old enough, my office door is open." Hattie tucked the card into her pocket, patting it safely next to her bus pass. "We'll see, Colonel. First, she has to finish middle school." They walked out of the Heinz Convention Center together, the grandmother, the technician, and the girl. Outside, the blizzard had stopped. The late afternoon sun had broken through the gray clouds, casting a brilliant, golden light over the fresh snow. The world looked clean, new, and full of possibility. Jada adjusted her backpack, the crystal trophy glinting inside the mesh pocket. The wind caught the hem of her oversized gray hoodie, billowing it out behind her. In that golden light, it didn't look like a hand-me-down anymore. It looked like a cape. Jada's victory reminds us that true brilliance often hides in the humblest places, much like a diamond waiting to be found in the rough earth. When we choose to strip away our prejudices and look beyond the surface, we not only empower the hidden potential in others, but also free our own hearts from the blindness of arrogance. So tonight, let this story be a gentle reminder to extend a hand of kindness instead of a glance of judgment, for you never know which quiet, overlooked soul is ready to change the world.